When you come to Israel on an Octagon tour, this is one of the places you will visit, the Church of St. Anne. Today you're going to walk through this very famous and historic building and experience all the sights and sounds of a church that is almost 900 years old. When Jesus was conceived in the womb of a virgin, we must remember that he also had grandparents on his mother's side. Who were these people? Are there any historic records of them? What were they like? Did they know Jesus? And did they watch him grow up? To tell the story of Jesus, you have to begin with a series of events that occurred 17 years before he was born. There are several ancient books that describe Jesus' birth and his childhood, and these books claim to provide supplemental information about Mary and Joseph and the early life of Jesus. These books are commonly called infancy gospels. Almost all of them were discarded by the early Christians immediately after they were written, and for good reason. Most of them are total fiction. But there is one historic book outside of our four canonized Gospels that provides what appears to be credible history about the events leading up to the birth of Jesus. And that's the Proto-Evangelium of James, otherwise known as the First Gospel of James. This ancient book, written perhaps 100 years after Jesus ascended into heaven, gives us our first look at the parents of Jesus' mother. According to the author, Jesus' grandparents were named Anne and Joachim, a wealthy couple who lived in Jerusalem during the birth of their only child, a young girl named Mary. According to an ancient tradition, this is where Mary was born. Today we call this the Church of St. Anne in honor of Mary's mother. The church is in the middle of the Muslim quarter of the old city of Jerusalem. According to the Proto-Evangelium of James, Anne and Joachim lived very close to this spot. For many years they had prayed for a child, but they were now both very old and had given up hope that they would ever have children. When both Anne and Joachim were children themselves, this land was ruled by the Jews under the Hasmonean dynasty. But in a few short years, the Romans took control of Palestine, and they attempted to convert Jerusalem into a pagan city. One of the things the Romans did is they erected a shrine dedicated to the Roman healing god Asclepius. That shrine became a cultic healing center for the residents of Jerusalem, and it was built within a few meters of where Anne and Joachim lived. The conversion of the first Christian emperor, Constantine I, brought about the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, which legalized Christianity. In 380 AD, the Edict of Thessalonica declared that Christianity was the only official religion of the Roman Empire. This means that for about 300 years, all of this was a Christian nation. In this particular location, the pagan shrine of Asclepius that was built just outside the home of Mary's birth was removed, and two Orthodox churches were built here, one commemorating the birth of Mary and one celebrating the healing of the paralytic at the nearby pool of Bethesda. In 614 AD, a pagan army from Persia marched on Jerusalem, and they destroyed both of these churches. This occupation marked the end of the Byzantine era in Jerusalem. Shortly after the city was overrun by these Persians, there were three separate Muslim caliphates, one after the other, all of them occupying Jerusalem, and all of them generally lenient toward Christians who wished to continue their religious traditions. That is, all except the last one. One of the most defining moments in church history occurred in 1009 AD, when a particular Egyptian caliph named Al-Hakam, who was unsympathetic to the Christians living in Jerusalem, came in and destroyed many of the Christian buildings, including the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Catholics in Europe had an answer for this aggression by mounting an army of their own, and their retaliation against the new Muslim overlords of the Holy Land was called the Crusades. The Crusades started in 1096 AD, and they lasted for almost 200 years. It was the Crusaders who built the church in which you are now standing. The Church of St. Anne was designed for Gregorian chants to be sung inside of it. The echo inside this church lingers for about 5 seconds. From this, we confirm that the entire Church of St. Anne is actually a musical instrument in itself, designed to be played by the human voice. Underneath this church is a crypt. A crypt is an underground room or a vault beneath the church that is used as a chapel or a burial place. The crypt is always the holiest part of any church. As a rule, ancient crypts were never built under existing churches. Rather, just the opposite. Churches were always built on top of existing crypts. One of the ways that you know that an ancient site is authentic is because you have to go downstairs to enter it. This is because modern Jerusalem is approximately 15 to 20 feet higher than it was in the 1st century. That means that to see the place where Mary was born, we have to go down one level. Once we descend into the crypt, we are seeing something that is very familiar in the Holy Land. Many of the primitive homes in this country had natural caves in the back of them, and the home of Anne and Joachim was no exception. Today inside this cave, there is a modern mural with a scene of Anne and Joachim and their newborn child, Mary. On the very top left, you see some Greek letters. The first 2 letters are an abbreviation for the Virgin Mary. The last 2 letters are an abbreviation of the Greek word Theotokos, which means God-bearer. What is so interesting about this mural is not what is painted on the front of it, but what lies behind it. Not far from the other side of this painting are ruins that are managed by the Greek Orthodox Church. While the Catholics may not be exactly sure where Mary was born, the Orthodox appear to be far more convinced that she was born in a cave just a few meters behind this mural. The mother of Jesus was both conceived and born in the same place where just a few meters away, her son would eventually heal a paralytic at the nearby pool of Bethesda. That place is right outside the door of this church. At the Israeli Museum, there's a large model depicting what the city of Jerusalem must have looked like in the 1st century. A tighter view from this angle will show the 2 pools of Bethesda as they probably appeared in the 1st century. One of the things that the model builders did not include were the homes surrounding these pools, which would have included the home of Anne and Joachim. If their home was in the approximate location of the Church of St. Anne, then this means that whenever Anne and Joachim exited their home, they would be looking at these 2 pools. And as Jews, they probably despised the Roman mythology that compelled their ailing countrymen to immerse themselves in water in the hope of being healed by the Roman god Asclepius. In the 1st century, this entire land was weary from not seeing a prophet for 400 years. And so many of the Jews in Jerusalem started to mix Judaism with Roman paganism. We see this as being a pattern throughout history, even up to today. When God's voice goes silent, the seeds of mythology begin to germinate. And Anne and Joachim witnessed all of this in their own neighborhood. Little did they know that near these same pools, their grandson would perform a healing miracle about 46 years later. At the very spot where they witnessed the desperation of their weakest countrymen, their grandson would someday step onto these porticos and bring the light of the gospel to the city of Jerusalem. I'm now going to ask you a very interesting question. The Proto-Evangelium of James claims that Mary was 16 years old when Jesus was born. And this is the earliest historic record of how old Mary was during the Nativity of Christ. But were either Anne or Joachim still alive when Jesus was born? In other words, did the boy Jesus have living grandparents? The answer is probably no. To begin, there's no mention of them in Scripture, either in Nazareth or in Jerusalem. In fact, the Orthodox Church teaches that Anne and Joachim were both deceased by the time that Mary was 11 years old. Remember that they were already well into their senior years when Mary was born, so they weren't going to live much longer. Finally, this elderly couple totally disappears from the pages of the Proto-Evangelium of James when Mary was 3 years old, where she is left to be raised on the Temple Mount in a girls' boarding school. Even in the 6th century historic book called the Pseudo-Gospel of Matthew, Anne and Joachim are completely gone from the historic record before Mary was emancipated from the temple at the age of 12. Judging by their absence, there is probably no reason to believe that Jesus' grandparents were alive when Mary left the temple and went to live in Nazareth. Mary Theotokos, the God-bearer.